with a question? Do we have a microphone?
Hi. Thank you. My name is Joe Painter. Three really fascinating presentations, I think. Thank you very much. My question is a simple one. Is self-sufficiency a good thing? Why do we want our cities to be self-sufficient in anything?
Who wants to take?
Well, I mean, I would say it's not a good or bad thing. It depends on how it's configured. So that would be my point. So
Could you take this microphone? Sorry, I think it's because we're streaming this live.
Okay, so I guess the point would be it depends on how these things are configured. So in a sense, cities have had autonomy and institutional capacity and so on or not. It comes in very different forms. But in this sense, in terms of being self-sufficient financially, in terms of managing the city and being autonomous in that sense, decentralized in that sense, it really does depend. So I think in London we end up in a very bad place because we have such a fragmented form of government and such strange ways of extracting value from the land that it leads to very poor outcomes. In Johannesburg, I think it's actually working reasonably well, the way in which value extraction is funding the municipality, and it's strongly decentralized, it's been so for 100 odd years. So it's, I think it doesn't matter. To answer that question is, in that narrow sense of self-sufficiency, that is working with our own value, increasing it, allocating it, contesting it, it really depends.
So I think you know the answer to this, why you've asked it. Self-sufficiency for me is drawing a line. So we're encapsulating something, and we're saying that everything should take place within this boundary. So if it comes to renewable energy, we might say that's a good thing. If we can generate energy that doesn't entail pollution elsewhere or have externalities that we don't want to see. But there are always going to be welfare questions that we don't want to include within the boundary. So one of my hobby horses is council tax. So social care is now locally paid for. So why do we draw up, in the Americans would call it, in a slightly different context, exclusionary zoning. So you draw a line and say, well actually now you put yourself up by your own bootstraps, off you go. So we have a council tax that in the northeast is probably about 3 times what it is in Westminster. And we put social costs into the local authority budget. So there's the self-sufficiency argument, perhaps we should pay for our own bins, but I'm quite happy to pay for northeast social care, surely that should come out of general taxation. So what goes into the line, and sometimes it's going to be a rhetorical line, self-sufficiency, food, miles, there might be things that we want to keep local. And then there are going to be times when we want to say actually we want to spread those burdens wider. So it might be a useful concept, a metric, but it's going to have variable.
And I would say almost exactly the same thing, I suppose. So as a principle for a metabolism of a city, then self-sufficiency, I think, must be a good thing because of externalities and other things. But clearly there's such complex things that actually you can't isolate themselves. And what maybe interests me is, as a discourse of self-sufficiency, what implications are there of that? So what would city leaders pick and choose to be in terms of self-sufficiency, and what are the implications of not being self-sufficient in other things? And I think, I don't know enough about it, and I don't know how many cities have seen this as a brand. I know Barcelona, current mayor, has seen that as a plan to brand the city. But I don't know what the implications of that. So if anybody knows a little bit more, partly if it's Barcelona, it must be the next big thing. Who knows? So that's what interests me, and why we should ask some critical questions. If there's anyone maybe with a bit more understanding of how it's spun out in Barcelona, that might be a very productive way to add to the debate.
I was especially thinking of self-sufficiency when you were informing us about the sale of land, council, town halls. Self-sufficiency in one ecology is also partnered with austerity, resilience, and basically the kind of jettisoning of welfare state altogether. So we have to be careful with this word, don't we?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, once you sell the land from under your feet, how can you be self-sufficient? Right? You can't do anything with it. So yes, for me, the privatisation of land is absolutely critical. And councils that are still selling off land, they need to be discursively asked not to, because there are very few legal controls. So if it's over, we have a system of best value, which some of you will know. And, you know, we could sell for social value, so give it for cheap to a community land trust or to a good that we want to prosper in terms of values. And up to 2 million, a local authority can do that without government permission. There are certain EU complications, but actually they're not that big, they're really not that significant, as they're sometimes made out to be. But yeah, you can sell it for the best value, and it's because of austerity that now the pound is the best value rather than values, and it goes back to Michael's point yesterday about the difference. And Bristol, I'm going to sound like a mad Labour supporter, which, you know, as many people are politically homeless. But I think it's a really important move to say we're not going to sell our land anymore. We're going to keep it. We're going to put on social housing. We're going to try and have new models, third way, community land trust type models, to try to keep the land from under our feet from being sucked up into a value chain for 250 years or forever, so that we can sustain ourselves. Go on.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we have to scope out a little bit on this, because one, selling land to a developer who develops something which yields business rates forever, great idea. Selling land to a developer who develops things and delivers to you roads, community infrastructure, clinics and so on, not also, I mean, in the context, is it such a bad idea? So it's difficult. And then keeping your land, is that a good idea? Keep your land to what? To turn your council housing into a financialised asset, to become the developer yourself, so you keep the profit. But in fact, for local authorities, like all government agencies in most of the world, the developments they do under those conditions are ones where they need to realise really strong value. And this is not just in financialised or austerity context, but the function of urban land has been to produce the urban for a very long time. So, I think we need to look at what is going on and why it's going on. But there are calculations that are being made that are a little more complicated than that. So we're not just talking about austerity, we're talking about a reconstruction of the sources of finance for local government, which places new incentives on them to become more of a developer, to become more entrepreneurial. In the UK instance, it's very interesting because it's not only about becoming a land developer, but also becoming stimulating of economic activity. Big problem if you don't have any opportunity for that. But it's an interestingly configured formulation which shapes local governments in many other places. So, I think I share a lot of the anger about these things and the consequences for how local authority finances are working in terms of cuts and services and so on. But we do have to look a little more closely at what are the different income flows. So the interesting thing about our Shanghai case is because there we have a case of development corporations which move money temporally. So you do one development, you do terribly well. You move to the next development, you've got a surplus to invest in it to get it going. That's quite an interesting model. The other thing is that the value streams are not just about land-based value, but about broader economic growth, about the return to the municipality of taxation on economic activity. Good thing. This is a synergistic way to promote a different economic growth path for the city as a whole. So it's not quite, I would say that there's more stories to tell. I don't think this is untrue, but I think there's more dimensions to the story.
I don't want to deny the real core importance of land, clearly from what the other two speakers have said, but actually you could extend that principle. So while we might want to think if we can't control land, we can't be self-sufficient, but actually if we can't control energy, water, or other very, very basic resources, we can't be self-sufficient either. And if we think of the UK, maybe in municipalities in the UK still have a fingertip grip on land, but they've lost it on water and energy a long, long time ago. So, if we were thinking of a good city, a self-sufficient one, actually energy and water would be under control of the urban authorities as well. And what's happened in the UK, they were nationalised for perhaps a very good progressive reason, but the nationalised assets were then privatised. So it's by a number of half dependencies, it's just been lost to urban authorities. And actually to get that back localised and mutualised is a huge thing, actually, which is almost seen as an impossible dream in the context of the UK.
Not that Corbyn, he can do that.
Thanks, Mrs. On. Thanks very much. And thank you to the three of you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions and maybe make just one comment. Antonia, you said in the beginning of your talk that the discrepancy or the distinction between public and private is pretty false in some ways, and I think that needs to be. I mean, you said it sort of glibly, but it's really important, and it reminds me of the work actually I was sharing and standing on shopping centres actually as public-private spaces, which I think really does shift the imagination around what those spaces are. They're not simply private spaces at all. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that. And then two other just very quick things. The one is that I think there are some areas of governance which I think are important to maintain some kind of national intervention. And it's useful to think about which those are. The one that comes to mind immediately for me is health. Because of the conservatism of people often at a very local level around health issues. And because I work in the area of drug use, that's one area where it becomes very evident that if you don't have national intervention around policies, the city's not going to be very responsive to the most vulnerable often. And that's a real problem, something that I've come up with. And then the last intervention, I think, is that if we don't bring into the conversation around cities much more overtly the whole idea of politics and the role of politics as a discipline, as a terminology, as a practice, then I think we lose a lot in the conversations that we're getting. Because so much of what happens at the local level is really about the political. And so whether, for example, the corridors of freedom continue to exist, it's a political issue. It's not about how much autonomy the national government gives to the local. It's about to what extent the new mayor decides that this is a priority that he or she wants to take on going forward, and so on and so forth. And so I think that it's great. All of the disciplines are great, but I think that politics, I don't know, it sort of falls away, and I think it falls away because it's so state-centered. And because we try often to move away from being state-centered, but we get pulled into it all the time, and I think we should.
We would like to respond.
So the distinction between public and private was said very much as a lawyer. So in English law, there are some differences, but primarily and it's a spatial point too, whether a piece of property is my bedroom or a public plaza, it's regulated in many ways through property law in the same way. That's different in Germany, it's different in Canada. So, there's a progressive spectrum, and we're down here. Yeah, so, yes, I think that's hugely important. That's in terms of ownership. I think we can talk about planning, and I think what we really want to do is talk about the public and planning. So, in England, 1942, I thought a committee during the war, some very conservative types, barristers, surveyors got together and said, planning is about the public interest in development. We have to claw that back. Now, they set up a scheme that was ultimately probably too complicated to work. But I think we have lost this argument about, do you know what, if you're getting the development rights, which have been nationalised in 1947, then you pay something back. And there's still something public, even in the most private of property. So that's where we can start to tease that back. And I think the discursive argument is very important. So even though legally there may be limited differences, we have arguments about how local authorities, universities, and other institutions use their property, even if you'd lose that in court. So yes, I think that's hugely significant. In terms of politics, I'll leave the other two to comment. But I think what I would say is that spaces for dissent and spaces for disagreement, and that for me would be the sign of a good city. But for that, we need information. So this recurring theme about transparency, about things being held back because of commercial confidentiality, and we have, I think, a much better sense of privacy, both spatially, my bedroom versus the square, and also about information than we have about publicity. And I think more public information and understanding that actually we could read a viability spreadsheet, it's really not that hard. What is difficult with viability is how you value the land, and that's where it's all gone pretty much wrong. But in terms of adding and subtracting, most of us can do that. So it's never as complex as expertise framing, I think, makes it seem. So the more we can have transparency, the more we can have discussion, and then we bring politics into local debates. That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think one of my conclusions from our research project is that these viability assessments and the endless pre-application discussions which are held in secret, these should be democratic, open, contestable processes. The planners are making a lot of big decisions about what package of communal infrastructure people get in London and elsewhere in the country. So I think there's definitely the politics of these is crucial. But I would also say politics, I mean the mayor and so on, this is a big P politics. And I'm quite struck in Joburg how in a way the city itself and its configuration and spatiality and constituencies presses on the political possibilities. Okay. So on the one hand, the mayor is in a coalition with the EFF and people who want to invest in the far distant informal areas which are their constituency. But this is a relatively small constituency, and the structure of the city, all the technical issues around transport, sustainability, and so on, delivery, and also the fact that the loan from the French comes down to haunt people, the bulk infrastructure is put in, and the developers' formats are presented. I think the city itself will continue to produce something. May be rather different if the mayor, Parks Town really pushed this and imagined the term and all that kind of stuff. But that was also a kind of leadership by speculation. As Alison Totis is very dismissive of that. You say something, you propose a big name, you advertise it around the world. It's not necessarily effective in embedded governance. So I think there's definitely, I think the politics is important, but I would also point us towards a politics that is perhaps sites that we're not used to, the sites where developers negotiate things with planners, and who's the good guy? Absolutely unclear. What are people's interests? How can they be configured? How can different people be enrolled in the project? So this is why, for me, the site of politics is re-territorialized. So the city government, yes, these matter, and national government decisions matter, but the transnational and assembled collection of actors and their particular relationships around projects is potentially a more fruitful site for looking for politics and looking for intervention levers, is my hunch.
Just to bring that, I totally agree. The term self-sufficiency is such a simplifying tool that you can't impose it to every policy area. So clearly it's a classic question that different policy areas really demand different scales, and health might be a national one, energy might be a regional one ideally. So to apply it as a simplified term is clearly not, and you get into trouble that way, I suppose. So it's an issue of scale, but I think it's also an issue of context. So self-sufficiency might look very different in a high-growth area like the southeast of England than a deindustrialised area where you'll have to get on with your own resources. So it's not only scale, but it's context as well, I think. But the politics then, that complex question has to be married with, well, where is there scope for innovation, scope disruption, which is essentially political questions. So where is there energy in certain city authorities that want those powers to test and experiment? Clearly, with no resources, no imagination, no politics, self-sufficiency is going to look rather dull and actually probably quite damaging. So.
Maybe I'll ask a question now. There's something about the expression self-sufficiency that seems to unravel into these discussions of the self, thinking about individualization, the individual in itself, or these particular institutions, like you were talking about, the local authorities. And throughout all of your presentations, I was thinking about we lost track of other forms of shared property, say through cooperatives or mutuals or any such other forms. So that, for instance, in Germany, the take back control of energy production is definitely through cooperatives. So I was wondering whether you had any thoughts about that, whether you have found this in your research. Is this something that is coming back, can make a comeback, or are we stuck in the very sort of self-individualized, one institution, one person? I don't know. Maybe we need some more sunshine and coffee.
As someone kept saying to us the other day, we need a third way again, which in England is a very bad joke. But yes, this public-private communal, and Michael was talking about the difference between titling and tenure and the tension that produces. And the assumption is that if we title, then it will be individualised. So that's classically so-term, right? So the argument is, how can we create institutions to hold things in common? So community land trust would be the obvious one. In property terms, that tends to be community on the outside, property on the inside. So it says it's communal, but when you come to it, they're houses, they're bedrooms, they're spaces where people can't necessarily access. An opposite might be a commons or a village green, which would be common on the outside, property on the inside. Because in England, and it really does vary by jurisdiction, but in England, commons is a designation that floats above the land. It's a regulatory recognition. It doesn't affect the property rights itself. That's obviously different in different countries with different histories. So we can think about these things, and we should think about these things. I think sometimes the reflexive community is that communal is the answer. Doesn't take seriously how communal can be privatised from within. So I think there are limits to how far it can go in terms of housing. But I think energy is really interesting. I'm going to give that to Geraint because he knows lots about energy.
I was trying to think of things that are allowed to be collectivised, and clearly land isn't. Politically, it's not seen, it's far too important. So the things that are allowed to be corporatised, certainly in the UK context, but probably elsewhere, are fairly minor. So anecdotally, I'm thinking, there's been a movement to, I suppose, corporatise libraries because they were being closed. So actually, it's a brilliant agenda for austerity. So instead of closing them, let the communities run them for free as well. So there's a limit to what actually cooperatives might mean and what it's the answer to. Clearly, if it was a socialism, land would be corporatised, and energy as a big scale. So energy is corporatised, but it's not taking on the big six, which has got a real, in the UK, 6 energy companies that are extracting profit from what is a very, very basic resource that we all need. And there is a cooperative movement, but it's just scratching the surface. It's never really going to take them on because we're really dealing with a nationalised infrastructure that's been of the grid, and actually any cooperative is just going to be in place of a much, much bigger context. So I suppose I'm pessimistic. While cooperatives look like an attractive proposition for a lot of these things, the things that matter because of the way power is organised in society, we're not going to allow to be corporatised.
Yeah, I would just say that, one of the biggest threats of this kind of extractive land value process in London is the displacement of exactly these collaboratively achieved, communal, emergent, everyday resources for the poor. Just really under great threat. The community hall, the free places for young people to hang out, the places where, over decades you can practice and enjoy sharing different cultural events and activities. So if you were in a session earlier with Susie Hall talking about the hyper-diverse streets and the kind of value, social and land value held there. With the configuration of financial streams through land value extraction, it's very hard to see how the politics of defending these places goes forward. So communities across London are very organised to try and bring forward planning arguments, to engage, a lot of work around that. But my sense is this needs an escalation. So if there's not a stronger mobilisation of urban politics. But then this is again obscured by the fragmentation of everything. You have 33 boroughs of councils, you have 40 plus opportunity areas, you have things going on here, no one can see what's going on. We don't even talk about the opportunity areas as a site of maximum value extraction. It doesn't, because everyone organizes around each little one, you know. So I think the point, I suppose, is a little bit about what is, you're talking about a self, an individual, what's the individual? Not like a person, but what is the entity, the territory, or the institution? And with massive fragmentation and obscurity of what is going on, together with the fragmentation of financial flows and interests, it's very hard to see how you can generate a collective concern. So the opposite, where you have a more robust, politically accountable metropolitan government, I mean, Parkes Tower was thrown out, good. I mean, not that I don't like him, but good. Because this is a metropolitan scale of electoral accountability in which the entity is everyone in the city. And I think that's an imagination that we don't really have institutions in London. The mayor is extremely weak and is unable to really drive through a collective agenda. And then because it's highly transcalar governance, the central government is simply using us all to pay the bills and destroying our city, and it's very sad. The end of my road is now a huge, big, tall building instead of the sunset when I come home. Very bad.
If no one else has a question, maybe we can go and see the sunset outside.
Sorry, I have already asked a question, but I just wanted to add to that. We're saying there are different investments in the city of the future. Different agents, I suppose. Well, the university is also one of those. And it's the whole notion of capital investment in the city to come, and how that has actually extracted any notion of civic care. It's not there. But you might think that local councils are actually just handed over land. They're handing over land to universities. They're not even selling land to universities. They don't want to maintain the cost of looking after a building. They're not being creative at all. They're just giving the city away, actually. Vast tracts of the city away to universities. So we're inside the beast that's taking over.
It would be a nice thing, but I fear that in fact often it's not quite like that. That is, in our case, we get a bit of land in the Olympic Park. We have to pay interest to the London Legacy Development Corporation for the mayor's loans to develop the land in the wider area from my work every day. The university has nothing other than our work and the students' fees. So, I think the way in which universities are getting enrolled in land value extraction is one thing. So that's our case, UCL. We're very stupid because Imperial College along the road has got a building coming up in my case study area, which is to cover the costs, to improve their financial position. So they're speculating in urban development to house students, so they're speculating on their own students again to pay their bills. So I think that sounds very benign. The city will give the university a piece of land. Sounds good.
I don't think it's benign at all. You have to look at the different cases. Some cities are doing that. Depends how poor the city is as well.
And it's often justified on an economic analysis. So one consultant who particularly I've seen has been doing the rounds, valuing how much universities are worth in the local region, and then that is underpinning bond rules. So I know Bristol borrowed 200 million. We're building a brand new campus for 300 million. And do not forget that there are two income streams in particular from universities. One is tuition fees and one is rent. So once the student housing is paid off, that is a rental stream. And at UCL cut the rent, at Goldsmiths cut the rent, cut the rent. Students are paying just about their entire maintenance grant on rent. They are seriously underfunded. They are being put off from studying in high value locations like London or Bristol because they simply cannot afford it. So yes, I'm absolutely with you that universities are capturing an income stream, they're creating an income stream. Sometimes, to Unite, and it's the private student accommodation providers who then have nomination agreements from the university. The students goes there and that's an income line. And there is a logic of financialisation running through the city, and yes, it's regeneration, and there may be good reasons to do it. Once you come into a station, you see an impressive university building. I will say at Bristol we are trying to do things differently. We are trying to think about public space, we are trying to think about community engagement, but you have to pay the bills. And if you can't pay the bills, then there's a limit to what you can do. But we were just told when we were on strike, staff pensions are less important than buildings because they don't bring the same return.
But they allow them to get the loans to get buildings.
But yes, they certainly pay off the calculation.
I'm going to let Andresa maybe take the last words.
Well, just because on what she was saying, the question, the only example I can think about really giving land when the state gives out land is in Brazil to some evangelical churches. And that's something quite interesting because they get land, they pay no taxes, and they occupy that space. That would be a whole new discussion, but that's one example of really land given, very different from the case of universities.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to thank you all very much for your very interesting contributions, and I think we should go outside and have a bit of a breath of fresh air before we go on to the last event of the evening. So thank you so much.